Hi, I'm Julie Turner, and I am pleased to present to you today some ideas about student resistance in the classroom. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, here's a little bit about me. So when I'm not doing this, I am actually a professor at Lindenwood University. I teach nonprofit management. That's a little bit about my background. I actually was really fortunate to also work in the K-12 environment. I taught inner city Detroit for a couple of years, and so dealt with a lot of adolescents who, struggle a little bit with being really very engaged in the classroom. Have been very fortunate to spend most of my career working in youth services. And of course, as a mom, you can definitely understand what it feels like to have young people not always want to pay attention, for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So what's really important to understand about that is that for a lot of students, school is not seen as a source of joy, which I know is probably not terribly surprising to you. They really see it as an obligation or something they absolutely have to do. So we do operate a little bit as educators as sort of like salespeople. And I know that makes some people feel uncomfortable, but I actually kind of like that idea, that whole notion of that we need to persuade them to feel a little bit more engaged. So here's what we're going to be able to cover during our time. We're actually going to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to what engagement is and looks like. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the 5 levels of engagement in sort of a comedic way a little bit. There's 2 specific strategies that I'm going to address today are specific to power and modeling. There are obviously so many more topics around this particular topic that we won't have time for. So I'm going to pull out those 2 things specifically. And then the last one is really the importance of connectiveness, that's so essential for our young people to experience. All right. So what does a lack of motivation look like? If we were together in real time, I would love to spend some time having people give examples of what that looks like. And I think that we would be on the same page. When students are distracted, when they're doing other things, when they engage in sort of not very helpful behavior, when they're not doing very well, when they're absent a lot, all those kinds of things can definitely look like a lack of engagement for sure. So those of us who are maybe within my generation will remember who this guy is. So if any of you have ever had the chance to see Ferris Bueller, or remember this teacher who is basically sharing a lesson and the students are just consistently not engaged. They're popping their gum, they're sleeping on their desks, all those kinds of things. And so of course the really famous line from this movie is, Bueller, that kind of thing. So that idea. So that's a sort of a funny look at that, and we know how that feels. So what student engagement is, make sure that we're on the same page, it is referring to the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, which I love about that students are actually feeling very on the affirmative of this experience, and passion that students show when they are learning or being taught, which extends to the level of motivation they have to learn and progress in their education. So there's all these things on the front end that have to happen that we can measure or see the degree of attention, their interest or passion, but then ultimately, how does that affect the outcome, which is how successful they are in the classroom, measured by certainly a lot of different factors for sure. So the levels of engagement, and these are kind of a fun look at this. One author, Philip Schlettley, who is the founder and CEO of the Center for Leadership and School Reform, said there are generally 5 different ways that students react or respond to school-related tasks and activities. So again, I'm a little stuck in the 80s here with some of these activities. Well, the first kind of character is rebellion. And again, looking back at some of our John Hughes movies, sorry, I just can't resist. This kind of individual would have very diverted attention, no commitment to the tasks on hand, also can be very well termed a problem child or a behavioral issue. So here's one kind of individual, and these are why these things happen. So if you're rebellious, this is what you would look like. Again, going further from that, what a rebellious student looks like in the classroom is absolutely refusing to do the assigned work, behaves in a way that's very disruptive. Instead of doing the tasks or activities that you are requiring of them to do, they will find some other way to divert and to act out. They can tend to be very defiant. They often feel very self-conscious about their lack of ability, which is really important to understand that that's like the thing behind the thing. And sometimes thinks he or she is smarter than the teacher. So I think we've experienced individuals like that. The next kind of level of engagement is what we refer to as retreatism. Okay, so these are not necessarily students who act out, but they often can appear to be sort of an isolated loner kind of student. They don't have any attention, no commitment. Again, they're very easily overlooked because they're not really acting out. And what this kind of student looks like is the following kinds of ways. They really work hard to not be noticed. They're very disengaged from the task at hand. Don't really make any attempt to comply. Not disruptive, so again, that's why they're so easily overlooked. Doesn't participate, really doesn't gain or learn anything much from the task at hand, does minimally what's required to get by, very absent or tardy because again, they feel very disconnected from the school environment and would just like you to leave them alone. Then what our next level is the ritual or passive compliance. Very low attention, low commitment, again, doesn't really stand out because they're not a behavioral issue. So there's that. They really don't see a lot of value in the assigned task. They just do minimally enough work to avoid negative consequences. The emphasis is placed on meeting the minimum requirements. They're satisfied with just C work. So then the next level is what's referred to as strategic compliance. And we all know these students. So I actually picked out a kind of example from every possible generation here. Very high attention, but low commitment. Definitely follows the rules, overachiever. And we've all had students like that as well. But here's what this looks like. They want to get an A in your class. They want to get into college. They want to earn extra points. They're very proactive about extra credit opportunities to make up for lapses in actual effort, and they're definitely strongly motivated by rewards. All right, then our final category, which is what we would love to see happen in the classroom, is what we refer to as authentic engagement. That's an individual that has very high attention, high commitment, the kid who loves to learn, and just a few examples of that. And then what that looks like, of course, in the classroom is they love just to learn for the sake of learning. They really get involved in whatever the task is at hand. They want to earn an A in your class, and they will. They're very motivated by that. They want to get into a competitive college. They will use extra credit, but not as a means to make up for anything they haven't done, just to do more. They just love to learn. And then they also talk and think about your class long after the period is over because they're really genuinely interested. All right, so if we look at all those different 5 levels of engagement, then the bigger question is, how can we increase authentic engagement? Because that's the characteristic that we would love to see the most happen with students. And so I'm going to address some of those components. All right, so here's the biggest thing here, and very often intellectually we know this, but we don't always understand it in terms of how to apply. And the reality is that children behave better when they are interested and engaged, okay? Effective learning occurs when students are interested and excited. This does not mean an active class does not mean an out of control class. You can actually still have a very lively class session without it being behavioral issues at hand. Your expectations are what the students will reach, and you have a set goal that the students are very aware that exists so that they know how to reach it, and it's realistic as well. All right, so the first strategy that I want to talk about is this whole idea of power. So there's always going to be a power struggle, and so the idea here is to make sure that you're giving students much power over their behavior as possible if you want to see much more of this authentic engagement going on. All right, and so what this means is having the resources, the opportunity, and the capability to influence the circumstances of one's own life. And so students will actually do better the more power that they get to have over the outcomes, all right? And so to be able to reinforce that, we need a number of those opportunities and then a rapid frequency for those things to happen. So we can tell when there are issues. So when we see these things, we can see that we are having a problem with power, because power in and of itself is not a negative circumstance. But when these things happen, these are power struggles. So if they act helpless, if they withdraw, if they avoid being in charge of others, if they respond with frustration, if they blame, They are very critical of others' accomplishments or have problems making decisions or create distractions. These are all, at the end of the day, the thing behind the thing here is a misunderstanding of power. So here are a couple different ways that you could address this. And one of these strategies is called the choose, pick, decide approach. So, and you tell yourself this in your head that you're going to allow the students to choose, they can pick, they can decide. Here are the examples for that. So let's say, for example, that if you teach a language or arts course, that you're going to put 3 different pictures on the board and then have students choose one to write about. You're not telling them just one choice, you're actually giving them 3. And that gives students a lot more control or power over what the decision can be. Then another example from another topic would be math assignment. So let's say that you have a chapter, but then they can choose to either do the odd numbered questions or the even numbered questions. And so then again, what you're doing is you're still getting them to do the drill and to practice a task, but they actually have some choice in the matter. So what you want to have happen becomes consistent with what they want to have happen too. Another example for like littler kids is you can choose to do it on the green paper or the red paper. So here's an example of how the choose, pick, decide strategy would work. All right, so here's another example using a little different variation of this. You can choose, decide, and pick to help students see the choices they are making. So here's an example. I'm wondering what grade you will choose this semester. I love this particular statement because I will oftentimes have students in my classes say, you gave me an X grade on an assignment. And I always say, no, I didn't give you the grade. The grade, based on the rubric, these are the points that were assigned, and this is the grade that resulted from the points that you had. So I love this. I'm wondering what grade you will choose this semester, putting the onus on them that they can choose to earn an A or they can choose to earn a D, but the power really is with them. I see you decided to staple it rather than use tape. How many of you chose to review your notes last night? So just making a conscious effort of using choose, decide, and pick is really very powerful in the vernacular here. I see you chose to ignore her when she teased you. And of course, these things take some practice for sure. All right, so here's another way that you can use it a little bit more complexly. So I heard you chose to end up in the principal's office yesterday. So that's as opposed to you went to or you ended up, that there was actually a choice behind it. That's actually really powerful use of language. And then there's another one where a student says, Roberto ripped my coat, and how did you choose to respond? Because your choice, your response is definitely your choice. I can't let him get away with something like that. So which behavior did you pick? He made me mad. So you decided to do what? He started the whole thing and you chose to respond with. That just gives you some examples of how you can move through that kind of process, being very intentional about the use of chose, decide, and pick. All right, and the dominoes of self-responsibility happen this way. They always start out with the impact of words. Words affect or impose on thoughts. Thoughts then go on to inform beliefs, and beliefs then go on to shape your behaviors. All right, and another example of this, the choose, decide, pick. If you decide to keep talking, you will be deciding to sit apart. Again, putting the decision-making power in their hands. If you choose to have your snack now, you've chosen to not have one later. All right, see how this works? If you decide to turn it in on Monday, you will have chosen to receive the grade you earned. If you decide to turn it in after Monday, you'll receive one grade lower than the grade you earned, okay? And again, this might seem a little awkward when it first starts out because it maybe seems a little unnatural, but once you get going, it has a lot of really good impact. Please make a different choice. This was actually one of my favorite phrases that I used to say when I was a mom of little kids. This is, and then, an example of that would be, this is not the appropriate time for sharpening your pencil. Please choose a better time to do it so you don't distract the class. Again, you're not telling a student, go sit down or do not, but you're putting the power in them so they can understand what the consequences are. All right. Another thing that I think is really effective and impactful in the classroom is what I refer to as freedom phrases. So they would maybe ask questions, were they having you make the decision about whether they should do what they're doing or not? Some examples would be, may I sharpen my pencil now? Will this book qualify for extra credit? Is it okay if I ask Beth to help me, etc.? When you say yes to a student, even though you think that's what they want to hear, that actually gives you as a teacher all the control and power, all right? And that's not necessarily ultimately what's best for the student. So when you use freedom phrases, it lets the student have some control or power over their actions, but at your discretion as the teacher. So instead of saying, yes, try one of these, it's up to you. It's your choice. What do you think you should do? You choose. You get to decide. You make that decision. Those are all things that put the power back in the student's court to be able to make a decision that still works within your parameters, but lets them make the decision-making power. So here's an example. May I sharpen my pencils now? If you can do it without disturbing the reading group, you decide. May I go to the library now? My concern is that you be back here at 11:15. You choose. So you're not telling the student no. You're saying this is what, and then they have to be in a position to where they have to make a decision. So you're giving them enough respect to allow them to choose. All right. So the next strategy among the two that I'm going to cover is what's referred to as modeling. And this is so important for our students to have from us as well. So in order to be able to refer to an adequate example, in order to establish meaningful values, ideals, and personal standards, we forget sometimes that students need to be demonstrated to them what personifies or is an example of good work. And we can't expect students to understand what that is without some direction. So when students have good models, and that means, of course, not just role models, but actually examples of how things work, they're able to make better sense of their lives. They can use it to clarify their own standards and live up to them. They know the standards of performance that are required. They know what they can do to move within it. They also understand what quality work looks like. So here's another strategy for this. Again, using three different words rather. It's the direct, do, and debrief. Okay, and so how you need to do that is you have to spend some time teaching the how-to of lessons, how kids should approach the lessons at hand instead of just imposing on them on the lesson. You need to invest time in training students to work effectively in the classroom with the resources that they have, and to focus on the how-to on as many different learning styles as possible, because you're going to have varying learning styles in the classroom for sure. Okay, so on this slide are several different examples of how you can use this in the classroom. One of the things that you need to make really clear is make expectations simple and clear, all right? And that's going to apply to whether a student is really young or they're 22. Let them know what quality work looks and sounds like. Show them. You have to persist longer than they can resist. One of the examples I really love with that in classes that I teach, when we have a first assignment for the year and students aren't really sure what I expect from them, I will then find a really quality piece of work. I will ask that student if they don't mind me sharing it, and I'll deduct the information where I take out the name and any identifying information, and I'll post it onto our Canvas. Why that works so well is it really helps affirm for students to understand what quality work looks like, to know that I didn't define the work, someone else or their classmates actually was able to be capable of doing this really quality work, so they know that it's possible. And it's also extraordinarily affirming to the student who did the great work to begin with as well. The next really strong suggestion I would make is to divide and limit information. So you want to divide information into smaller pieces, presenting these small pieces one at a time to give students who are low in mental models more points where they can stop, check, and take stock. So much of what happens for kids, especially when they're younger, is they start to lose confidence in their abilities. But if you can give them points where they can stop and check and go back and see where their work is right or wrong, that's really important for them to have that, for them to feel like they can be engaged in success. Again, the see one, do one, teach one is a great strategy as well. No matter what they're learning, they always need to see an example. They need to see the model, then they need to perform the skill. And I bet some of you as adults are more what we call visual learners. I know for me too, I need to see what something looks like before I put it together. So instruction manuals aren't really very helpful to me until I can see what the thing is supposed to look like after I put it all together. So one thing they do is they need to see the model, they need to perform the skill, and then they need to have the opportunity to teach it to somebody else. And those three things together are very helpful for students in being able to model and figure out what success looks like. Another thing we need to do, and teachers sometimes we're not great at this, is that we need to check on our students soon and often. We need to manage the classroom by walking around. We need to make sure that we're witnessing student success. That if a student is feeling stuck and they're not comfortable coming to talk to you about it, that you're going around and witnessing their work. And we're not talking about, oh no, you're not doing this correctly, or more like, hey, it seems like you might have a question here. Is there something I can help you with? Or, wow, it looks like you're moving in the right direction. Is there anything I can do to help you stay on the right track here? Those are very important when it comes to modeling for kids. Then this is extraordinarily important as well, this feeling, this need for connection. And I think one of the things that we probably have gained the most during the pandemic is knowing that students still need each other. It's been hugely impactful on us during this time that we assume that, people will do well working in isolation, and I think we found this actually really not the case at all. So another thing that a teacher can do in the classroom is what I call connective teacher talk, and using really terms like us, we, our, where it makes the students feel like they're part of a bigger picture. It's not just a relationship between the teacher having all the control and the students not having any. Some of the examples that I would see that relates to this is ask 3 before you ask me, meaning that the kids would actually ask each other before they ask the teacher. Where a teacher would say, someone in your group knows this, or where they present to the group, is this a group question? And then they can do it. And of course, you need to do this in a very non-condescending way. Creating our classroom is also a great strategy where students get to agree on the classroom norms. I've seen really good primary teachers do that. They'll say, okay, what is going to be a good classroom look like? And the kids all get to decide what it looks like. And then they actually get to come up with the behaviors and the norms that they think are going to be important to be able to maintain that. So again, giving them some control over that situation. Cooperative learning, I notice that's really important. Service learning is another great way for kids to feel very connected, like this is their classroom. And also group names, which, again, that works a little bit better with primary kids, where they actually have their classroom has a mascot, or they call their own group a certain name, and kids really enjoy that too. And lastly, build it and they will come. I truly believe that you need to have time every day for kids just to be able to have interaction with each other. For students just to have one-on-one or group interaction, that's how they're going to get to know each other. Another thing I want to say is I was very intentional about not saying group projects. I think, everyone gives a hard eye roll to group projects because remember the whole 90-10 rule. And remember here I'm talking about cooperative learning versus group projects where kids actually are invested and get to decide what that project is going to be all about. So the question is, what is the number one reason why students behave in school and work to achieve? So that's a huge question here. And since I don't have you with me, I'm going to go ahead and move to the answer. It is absolutely because they're in a relationship with an adult that they respect and care about and don't want to let down. It has more to do with that than grades, the assignments, whatever else, that they really want, they appreciate that teacher, they respect him or her, and they want for you to be pleased with what they're doing. And then, of course, don't forget to maintain a sense of humor. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the very best in executing some of these strategies.